I just want to welcome everyone to this special meeting of the IMAG and MSM Consortium. We're running this together with the working group on multiscale modeling and viral pandemics led by James Glazier and Reinhard Laubenbacher. So thank you to that working group for hosting this meeting today. I will turn it over to James to do some housekeeping about this recording and this meeting before we get started.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you again to everyone for agreeing to come and for setting this up for us. We really appreciate it. I need to remind everyone that this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube and is being recorded, and that the discussions will be available publicly after the meeting. So the format of the meeting will be that Grace will be presenting and running the meeting for the first hour with the discussion on the Bridge2AI program. And then starting at 4, there'll be a tiny review of the history of this working group for people who are not members. And then a discussion of multiscale modeling strategies for digital twins and possible fall meeting of the IMAG-MSM consortium. To remind you, Reinhard and myself are always available if there are any complaints, critiques, comments. We have our usual communication channels, which you've seen before. If you want to find out about them, contact us. I will skip the announcements because this is going to be a discussion. And I want to mention that July 8th and 9th, we have Evan Patterson and James Fairbanks speaking. July 15th, this may be of interest beyond the working group. We have 2 award-winning science journalists, Martha Mendoza and Alessio Bayak, speaking to us. And all of the people who came today are welcome to join any of our seminars on Thursdays. These are open to everyone. And if you have suggestions for people we should be inviting, please let us know. And with that, I will turn it over to Grace to lead the meeting.
Thanks, James. So I will share my screen and really thank this working group, which is our newest working group of the IMAG-MSM Consortium. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with our consortium efforts, I'm going to show the general wiki page and also make this as an excuse to let you all know that we are undergoing major upgrades this weekend, and so you will still be able to read the wiki, but you won't be able to edit it. In other words, you can't log in to edit until after July 4th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. But the activities of our consortium is listed under Activities tab, and this particular working group is under the MSM task forces and working groups for clinical translation applications, and this is the multiscale modeling and viral pandemics working group, which was a brand new working group that started up by James and Reinhard last year during the pandemic. And you can see the working group members and subgroup pages are all here. The subgroups, there are 30 plus subgroups and over 100 members. So I'm really thankful and excited that you all are going on so robustly with your webinar series at this time on Thursdays. And so I wanted to use this, and James and Reinhard invited me to talk about Bridge2AI because this is a new program that NIH just launched, and we actually are using the wiki to host the working pages of the Bridge2AI group. So for those of you who are on the wiki, you can go to Bridge2AI here, and you can see the information about Bridge2AI here. And so I really want to use this session to just make sure everybody's on the same page about Bridge2AI, its goals, and to offer the Google Doc for you to post any resources or questions you might have. This wiki page, again, is available for you to also help the Bridge2AI community post any resources related to the different components of Bridge2AI here. And so, so in the calendar appointment, I asked you, hopefully many of you had the chance to look at the recordings about this program. So we're not going to spend a lot of time presenting. And so the recordings are available on KaiStorm. And I'm going to flip to the KaiStorm tab. Can you guys see that? Did it flip for you? So for those of you who cannot see this page, if you went to the agenda and clicked on the page, you should be able to register. Then you'll be able to get into this page. All you have to do is just enter your profile. And the beauty of this KaiStorm page is this is the platform for the Bridge2AI folks to really network. And once you've entered in your profile, you become one of the 1,800 or so participants. Oh, actually, we are up to 1,901 participants. And the beauty of using this page is that we're using this as a platform to help people network and find people. And so you can actually find different expertise listed here under the filters. You know, look for people, connect with people. And so I just wanted to use this time right now to kind of walk you through this page. And so to have you look at the participant page, if you find people that you're interested in talking with, go and join the Slack workspace and start talking to them. And then once you start talking to them, there's all these resources on the left-hand navigation bar where you can actually meet them in the networking lounge, which is a Wonder Room. Of course, you can use your own Zoom, but this is a Wonder Lounge if you wanted to meet with people there. But you need to set up the appointment. And we also just posted this top banner to let you know that a bunch of us in the Bridge2AI working group is holding office hours this month for anybody who's interested in talking with us one-on-one. Take a quiz about Bridge2AI. I think taking the quiz will help you kind of understand some of the nuances with these little true, false, multiple choice questions. It's really not about how well you do on the quiz, but to sort of look at the questions and see if you really understand the premise and the spirit of the program, and also give feedback about this whole networking process. So I will jump back to the Bridge2AI page on the wiki, where I actually pasted a graphic. And again, if you go to the IMAG wiki, just type in IMAG space wiki, and you should be able to find it. And then go under activities, and under other interest groups is Bridge2AI. And so Bridge2AI really is about preparing data. It's in the scientific process, we have data preparation, model development, and model evaluation for scientific experiments. And we are in the data preparation phase, and Bridge2AI is all about preparing data that is ethically sourced informed by diverse perspectives. So ethics and diversity are the key spirit points of this program. We want to make sure that you build diverse teams, both on the research end as well as on the human cohort side. If you're studying humans, you're also welcome to study non-humans. But we really want diverse perspectives, and the diverse perspectives will lead to the ethical culture that we'd like people to consider. We don't want a culture of compliance. We want a culture of understanding ethics throughout the whole data collection process. And so we've broken it up into these different components within the program to develop teams, to understand ethical principles, instantiate them into the standards, which then are instantiated into the tools to collect the data, and then to educate the wider community on this entire culture of designing ethically sourced, fair, diverse data. These data will then be put into public repositories and then mined by model developers to make scientific discoveries. And so if you jump to the different parts of this diagram, we have different pages for it on the wiki. If you jump to the grand challenges page, I just posted this picture of the structure of the program and how people can apply for either the orange boxes, which is a data generation project, or apply for the Bridge Center, or both. So people can apply to be in different modules of data generation projects. You can apply to multiple data generation projects. You can apply to the Bridge Center. Everything is broken up into cores for the Bridge Center or modules for the data generation projects. You can apply different grand challenges for each of the different data generation projects. Again, because it's a program where we want generalizability of the data, we want crossover between grand challenges, between these modules of the orange boxes, between the cores of the blue bars, and to also cross over to future grand challenges. And the purpose of this meeting today is basically to tell the MSM consortium and the modelers that you all have a role in developing models and tools to help with each of these components in preparing ethically sourced data, as well. After the Bridge2AI consortium is all set up, we're going to be starting to run jamborees and hackathons where we will probably ask the consortium of modelers to help assess the processes in which the data are generated and the data itself to see if it is mineable and which your models can be used. And so we want to make sure that the modelers know that they are encouraged to join this effort and be part of it. And so I'm going to pause now and have the rest of my agency, IMAG agency representatives to chime in. I think if we go to, I'm going to try to stop sharing. If we go to the Google Doc, I have a lineup of agencies that are in our notes already. So the DARPA folks have been very much involved from their SD2 program. So I don't know if Joshua and Susan and David, if you wanted to chime in and say a few words at this point.
I'm going to encourage Susan to do so because she always has smarter words than me. So I can riff off of her words.
Yeah. Thank you, Joshua. I always wait for the cue. Yeah, so we've been spending the last 3 or so years developing infrastructure as well as models and AI tools for dealing with predominantly synthetic biology. And one of the points we wanted to comment on here, particularly to this group, is the need for the modelers to be involved in sort of the development of the standards for the metadata, for the data formats, for tools of that nature. So there's role for tools in creating, in formatting data that is created in a way that is usable. There are roles for tools that can assess data quality. There are roles for tools that it can assess ethics and can assess sort of the broad nature and the diversity of particular data sets and things in that nature. To be able to create these data sets, at least from our experience in this work that we've done on experimental data, and so this is mostly sequencing data as well as some flow cytometry data, you know, understanding what the experiment was intended to do, encoding that in, and getting a format that's going to be usable for the modelers is going to be critical in order for these data sets to be usable in the 5-10 year range. And so there's definitely a role sort of from the modeling perspective within these data projects.
And the only thing I'll add is the exact opposite as well, which is, you know, in principle in SD2, in the SD2 program, right, the goal of making the data AI ready so that the modelers could rapidly build off of it was to make the insights from those models then rapidly available back to the experimenters, so that you can get a rich iteration that accelerates the experimental cycle, especially in these very complex domains where, you know, experiments have long latencies and you're limited often by the throughput of your experimental capacities, right? So again, obviously there needs to be communication across there, right? Modelers need to be able to speak the experimenter's language. I mean, I wasn't around for the first 2 years of SD2, but I'm pretty sure it probably took those first 2 years just to actually get the machine learning people and the experimentation people to actually really understand and speak each other's language. It's definitely non-trivial. So, yeah.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Joshua. I've been adding to the Google Doc notes, so feel free to add your thoughts there and edit what I wrote. Next up, I did post the DOE funding opportunity that pretty much piggybacked the Bridge2AI funding opportunities, but on a much more rapid scale. I know Stephen Lee is on the line, but may not be able to talk much more about it because it's on a rapid phase for funding. So I'll put the link there and offer Steve to say a few words, but I know you don't have to if you don't want to.
Yes, I can say a few words, Grace. So take a look at that link. Pre-proposals from the DOE National Labs were due yesterday. So I'm slowly going through what I received, and we'll talk more with Grace about that. And full proposals from the DOE Labs are due July 19th. The focus from the DOE Lab perspective is on the development of privacy-preserving AI algorithms. So these are proposals for 1 year, $1 million, just a sort of a test pilot to take a look at the Bridge2AI program, engage some people from the Bridge2AI community from these events and other things that are going on, but to really focus it on how do we do AI and machine learning on privacy-sensitive data sets? The labs have a lot of resources and expertise in this area. And it's a good way to link up down the line with what the Bridge2AI program is doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. And so next up are the NSF folks. And I think Henry Couch is going to speak on behalf. Maybe have others join if you want, but go ahead, Henry.
Okay, yes. So I wanted to note that we also have some programs that I think are very compatible with Bridge2AI. We're making a big effort now to be looking at data as infrastructure. So we historically have funded national infrastructure, thinking of computing centers and networks. And now we're also thinking of data sets, because we've seen how the way in the past we have funded certain big data sets like ImageNet, a collection of 14 million images with tags that was done back around 2006, really was instrumental in leading to the deep learning revolution. So I put in the document some of our infrastructure programs, and if somebody wants to talk to our PDs about them, that's great. And then just say generally, we're interested in community building activities by partnering with other agencies, because I think we have really good reach into the academic computer science departments, right? And so joint activities where we could bring in those people and those PDs with people from bioinformatics who are dealing also with very similar issue or the same issues would be great. And finally, just to plug that we have our program, our sort of a flagship program, National AI Institutes. These are 5 $20 million institutes. Each is a multi-university consortium. And our next time we'll be able to put together a new call will be in 2023. So perhaps if we could start off with some small activities, we could look at doing something larger around data and models and applications. Thank you.
Thanks, Henry. I know we have several FDA folks on the line. You're welcome to chime in now. Sandy, I'll point to you, and if you want to refer to others. Sandy, Dorn, Chris, anybody?
Hi, Grace. This is Dorn. I just joined the call. This is Dorn Carranza, Director of Innovation and Partnerships for the Office of Science and Engineering Labs within the Center for Devices and Radiological Health at the FDA.
Thanks, Dorn. And did you want to chime in on anything that you might want this group of modelers to hear, or you're actually welcome to post in the Google Doc the wonderful website links that you had shared with me before. I think this group might find it useful.
Yes, thank you, Grace. We'll be able to do that. We're working on 20 program areas, one of which is artificial intelligence in our office, trying to address challenges with emerging technologies and developing tools and resources to be able to both accelerate innovation, but at the same time protect public health and patients. So happy to provide more details. That's something we're very excited to collaborate with this group to understand areas that we continue to need to do research, and we have to continue to develop tools that I'm happy to provide more details. You know, what are these tools that we are developing that will help accelerate innovation, upstream innovation particularly, and help achieve our goal that is to protect public health, but also to advance public health through fostering innovation. Again, you know, it's a pleasure. Look forward to connecting with everyone in this group and providing more details about the work that we are doing.
Thanks, Doran. And we'll move on to the folks at NIST. Jim, did you want to say a few words? Are you on the line?
A second. Yeah, here I am. Sorry, I was hastily jotting down some notes so I didn't miss anything important in case any of my other NIST colleagues are on the phone. I would enjoy Zoom. So just quickly, I mean, obviously lots of stuff going on at NIST. Of course, we're major users of AI in our own research portfolio to address technical issues related to our own mission, delivering standards and measurement technologies to all of our stakeholders in government, as well as industry and academia. We also have a lot of benchmarking efforts, standards development efforts, and best practice efforts at NIST. You know, I come to this coming from the material side, so not really bio specifically, the materials genome. That's how I got to know Grace, actually. You know, there's a lot of the common issues around data management and informatics that essentially transcend any particular discipline. And I think a lot of us are grappling with those. So I'm delighted to talk to anybody about that. And of course, at NIST, we also have this sort of special role in trying to develop sort of trustworthiness issues and some of the more foundational issues around AI. And that's not my area of expertise, but our information technology lab is trying to take a lead there. So I think that's enough.
Thanks, Jim. I think your materials genome project strategic plan also is very useful, your infrastructure that you're building.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so that strategic plan, we hope to have a new version come out sometime this summer, if all goes well.
Great. We'll go to some of the NIH folks. So Liz Janexi, did you want to say a few words?
Hi, everybody. I'm at OBSSR in the Office of the Director at the NIH. And of course, we throw out behavioral and social sciences as if it was sort of one thing, but as you all know, it's not. We represent many disciplines, and our aim really is to have some of these, if not all of these disciplines included in the Bridge2AI, and many of whom have been involved in modeling, and some of them have been affiliated with the IMAG. So I'm kind of representing writ large population health, epidemiology, health services research, psychology, health behavior type research, and then the sociology and demography and economics space. Many of these folks have embraced big data sets and linkages, tech tools that involve, complex algorithms, and they're well poised, I think, and should be at the table to help assemble data sets like this, and could be very influential in kind of specifying what kinds of data and how to, put the data in to be machine readable. In addition, many of our disciplines will have, just by the nature of the multidisciplinarity of BSSR, may have had lots of ethics backgrounds and training. We deal with a lot of sensitive data, a lot of vulnerable populations, a lot of PII, a lot of things that are, related to bias and race and gender inequalities. And so our fields are, really poised to be contributing. And then team science as well. So definitely want to tap into the BSSR community as you're building the teams. and of near and dear to my heart is bringing along the new generation of potential users of these data, the trainees that are now working kind of in hybrid spaces. So they have content domain that they're developing, whether it be in the biomedical domains or the behavioral and social science domains. And we're now trying to teach them that they have to learn about computational and analytic and big data and AI as they're going along, or else they're going to be left behind the data of the future. So that's kind of my pitch. I'm leading a T32 training program that's hopefully training some of these hybrid folks. And I'm a big champion of the modeling community for BSSR. So happy to contribute and take questions and help.
Thanks a lot, Liz. Yeah, I think behavioral science and behavioral research will be a really key opportunity in Bridge2AI, since it's sort of like a new frontier for a lot of folks in addressing a lot of the ethics and diversity issues. So,
and there are a lot of folks on the call here who deal with behavioral data who I can see.
Thanks for joining. Okay, I know a lot of people are having issues with the event code on Kai Storm, and I'm gonna hopefully get a response to that soon. Emily Greenspan, are you on the line? Did you want to speak about your NCI program, as well as your efforts in Bridge2AI? And
Sure. Thanks, Grace, and thanks for organizing this meeting. It's really interesting to hear from all the different agencies. So a couple things. I'm in the Center for Biomedical Informatics and Information Technology at NCI. A couple things I'll talk about that might be of interest here. I helped to lead the NCI Department of Energy collaborations that has been going on for about 5 years now. So through that collaboration, we've been developing AI ML ready data sets in the context of predictive drug response models. And actually we have a lot of these data sets publicly available through our NCI predictive oncology model and data clearinghouse. Grace, I'll put these links in the Google Doc. I didn't have a chance to yet. With regard to drug response data, these have been integrated, labeled, normalized, and curated from multiple cell line studies, as well as NCI Almanac, the Genomic Data Commons, the Patient-Derived Models Repository, and PDXNet. Also, along the lines of what Stephen Lee had mentioned, one of the other projects under the NCI DOE collaboration has been working to develop privacy-preserving algorithms so that models that are built using PHI data can be more broadly shared. This project was working with what's referred to as SEER data. It's it's a large surveillance program that NCI has, and through the privacy preserving algorithms, we're now able to share that with the CDC, and the CDC is piloting some of that with us now, which is really exciting. Also, not exactly in line with AI ML ready data, but as a foundation for that, NCI has the Cancer Research Data Commons, the CRDC, that has different nodes for different types of data. So we have a genomics data node now, we have an imaging data node, we have a canine data node. And so that is certainly something we're looking to, building out functionality for expanding those data sets to be AI ML ready, but already it's a great kind of foundational resource to the cancer research and broader biomedical research communities. And then I'll also mention, as an offshoot of the NCI DOE collaboration, we've established what we call the Envisioning Computational Innovations for Cancer Challenges, ECICC community. Again, links, I'll put links in for all this. Starting about in 2019, we've been investigating or kind of trying to develop ideas around cancer patient digital twins. We've held several community workshops and events on this topic, culminating with a 5-day ideas lab that generated project proposals last summer. And some of those investigators were funded under small seed projects co-funded by NCI and DOE Office of Science. And I'm happy to hear from some of them, actually, they're going to be kind of combining into super teams and applying to Bridge2AI and kind of targeting the digital twin grand challenge. And so I guess I'll kind of wrap it up there, and I'll definitely put some links in the Google Doc.
Thanks a lot, Emily. And so did anyone else want to say a few words from the IMAG front? Any other agency folks want to say a few words? Julia, did you want to say something? Oh, Pankaj.
Hi, Ken.
Hi, Grace. This is Pankaj.
Okay, we'll hear from Pankaj and then Julia.
Okay.
Go ahead, Pankaj.
Yeah, this is Pankaj Kaspa from NHLBI. Thank you for organizing this, Grace. We at NHLBI have been running an NHLBI systems biology program, which is an area that is not quite there with the AI and machine learning, but I think there's a lot of modeling and computation that goes on in this particular area, and it ranges from both from heart, lung, and blood areas. And so this is a program that's been going on for the last 15 plus years, and we have had collaborations with Grace's IMAG and MSM Multiscale Modeling Group. And the program is still going on, and we still have PI meetings every September, middle of September, end of September, something like that. So any of you are welcome to join and be an audience in some of these PI meetings. That's all I have.
Thanks, Pankaj. Feel free to post your links about your programs in the Google Doc.
Sure, I will. Yeah.
Julia, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, let me see. Okay. Hi. So my name is Julia Berzhanskaya, but go by Julia because nobody can say last name. And so I work for NIDA, and we have a number of activities and open opportunities in AI ML for substance use disorders. So it's a very important area. Please come and see them. I'm going to post some links. But just to mention it to you, so I'm an office that's responsible for small business innovation research. So if you're working for university, that's an opportunity for you to partner or open perhaps your own small business. And we have AI for substance use disorder treatment development, and also very interesting for eliminating digital inequalities. Read the FOA for details. And then on a classical NIH kind of grant side, there is a notice of special interest where NIDA accept applications for big data analytics for drug abuse research, not to translate treatment and recovery tools, but to understand substance use disorders better. I also will post that link. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. And again, please post anything on the Google Doc notes that we're running on right now. So any other NIH folks or any other agency folks? If not, we'll go into Q&A. And I just noticed, I didn't mention, hopefully prior to the meeting, you did have a chance to also check out my own director's blog. his piece that I posted in the Google Doc. That's almost a verbatim transcript of his little video piece that shows the Institute directors videos of what they think are the big wins for Bridge2AI. And if you hear Bruce Ramberg talk, he really talks about the importance of physics-based models, trying to understand the mechanisms of the systems. But because biology is such a has such unknowns that physics-based models can't completely understand the system. He really does believe that there is a place for machine learning models. And, you know, you obviously heard him during the 2019 integrating machine learning with mechanistic models meeting, which he opened up. And so he's a firm believer on the use of models to really understand, make scientific discoveries. And now Bridge2AI is really trying to make these pristine data sets that are ethically driven from diverse perspectives to really help with that. So I will now open it up to any questions you all might have until 4 o'clock, which will then segue into the digital twins section of this meeting. And in the Google Doc, I posted the website FAQs from the Bridge2AI website. I also posted the question page on the Chi-Storm page. So a lot of people have already asked a lot of questions. And we also have an email where you can continue to ask questions. And I encourage you to sign up for the Bridge2AI listserv if you haven't already. If you signed up for Chi-Storm, we'll put you on the Bridge2AI listserv, but you know, if you wanted to make sure you're on it, you can go there. Any questions? Okay, well.
People are shy, I'm afraid.
I'm really happy. I mean, that means you guys.
There's a question in the chat window.
There is I was going to say there's a question in the chat, Grace, that says, can models, be they mechanistic or AI, be developed under this program, or is it primarily for data collection only?
Thanks, Herbert.
You knew I'd ask that.
So the Bridge2AI program is not for scientific discovery, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
It's not for extracting from the data to make discoveries using AI models or mechanistic models or any kind of analysis models. Okay. But you can develop mechanistic models to help decide on which data to collect. You can build AI models to help with standardizing tools. The intent parser that the DARPA folks mentioned could be something that you use AI models for. So we would see mechanistic or AI models to be more as a service to creating this wonderful new data, but to actually mine the data, that's would occur in the hackathons and the jamborees that after the consortium's all set up. And for you all to then test out your models to actually make discoveries.
Okay, I see.
And the next question, Grace, is how does data that is AI ready differ from being ready for mechanistic models?
So that is a great question. So we are using Bridge2AI to create data that's ready for essentially dumb machines. Now, depending on mechanistic models are not necessarily used just by machines. They're used by humans and smart humans who also can infer from the data. Perhaps the mechanistic models do not need to be as well defined, but the data that are collected from Bridge2AI should then be really nicely used as well in the mechanistic models. Now, I'll open it up to the rest of you all who are the experts in developing AI models and mechanistic models to counter my point or join my point or add to the point. And please also add to the Google Doc.
So I was going to ask a question, Grace, about standards, because standards can mean many different things. You can have standards of annotation of patient status or patient ID. You could have potentially needed much more detailed standards for describing experimental manipulations or drug treatments or therapies, which are underdeveloped. You could have standards for describing data collection. There are so many different areas in which standards could be developed. Listening to the Bridge2AI over the past few weeks, most of the discussion of standards was more in the concept of annotating patient medical record type things. And I was wondering a little bit, just the discussion I heard, I'm not saying overall, but the discussion I heard. And I was wondering if you could open up a little bit about some of the various ways standards could be important, because there's so many of them.
Yeah, no, I think Susan Buchholz-White from DARPA said it initially with what they learned from the SD2 program that has been going on for, what, 2 years, 3 years now, where standards need to be designed throughout the entire process, from the intent of the protocol to standardizing the sensor placement on the bodies in collecting the data, or the instruments, sensorized instruments, standardizing, you know, the way you would instantiate the ethical principles that would need to be addressed to address the social cultural issues for the data that are being collected. Yeah, there, I mean, I would say standards all over the place. Other folks, please chime in. I see Mohammed had joined the line. He's a data scholar that's working with us from the BRAIN Initiative. And it's been really wonderful to work with Mohammed to see how the sausage is made and see him develop standards on the fly as we're looking at his work in the BRAIN Initiative. So I don't know, Mohammed, if you wanted to comment on any of this. You're muted, by the way.
Thank you. That would have been horrible if I went on and on. It's just silence. Everybody, very nice to meet you. And Grace, thank you for inviting me to be part of this. So I'd be happy to share just a couple of very high-level thoughts, and then maybe if there's other points of discussion, it'd be great to have a dialogue around some of this from several of you. You know, I'm a computer scientist, so what really got me excited about the Bridge2AI program is when I'm dealing with healthcare data assets, and I think about the relative amount of time it takes to curate the data before training my machine learning algorithm for downstream purpose versus the amount of time that it takes to do the training of the model, it's typically very heavily skewed on that pre-processing, data collection, data curation side of the equation. So for a lot of the work that I've done historically. And so the way I see the value of the program is in creating tools that are going to make it easier to do that side of the equation, the piece of it that kind of eats up, you know, sometimes up in excess of 80% of the engineering or time effort of the trainees, of the, you know, postdoc, whoever else is responsible for doing the data preparation efforts ahead of time. So this is sort of like, I think as the name very aptly says, this is the necessary step that happens before the downstream AI. That's why it's a bridge to the AI, is how I understood it. I think it's pretty exciting stuff. And it'd be wonderful to see what members of the community can do to help us come up with either more appropriate sets of standards or tools that will decrease some of that workload on everybody.
I mean, I think Mohammed has been working, for example, on very standard data to begin with, right? With the PubMed data, he's doing a lot of NLP modeling, but even with data like from PubMed, he's been finding that even the attributes are very...
Yeah, I can give a concrete example, actually. I'd be very happy to give a concrete example we bumped into the other day. So for those of you who've ever looked at PubMed, and you know, usually the way that we consume, you know, an academic paper, if we want to know who they are and where they're from, we just look at the string and we're good to go. But if you wanted to do a bulk analysis over time and try to figure out, well, hey, which institutions are publishing which kinds of content at which moments in time, those strings, the affiliation strings, are not actually trivial to parse. It sounds like it would be at the 10,000 foot level, but that data is not structured. And so sometimes people throw the names of their lab in there. Sometimes, the PI will put, just their name as part of the lab, and sometimes the zip codes are included, other times they're not. So there's a heterogeneous set of ways, basically, even for something as simple as the affiliation information of the author, that it's not that it's impossible to figure out how to do that parsing so that you can use it for downstream effort, but it ends up eating up lots of engineering time, and you want to whip that data into shape. And so I think part of the thought here is, when creating standards, is are there these style of tasks that are happening a lot in the community, where lots of people are wasting lots of time, harmonizing data, lots of people are wasting lots of time trying to clean data up, and instead of spending time doing the fun part of science, which is building the models, thinking about the theories, and so on. And the idea is, can we come up with ways to invest basically through Bridge2AI so that downstream part, the fun part of this, is something we can spend a lot of time doing thanks to the tools that are developed here.
Thanks, Mohammed. I see there's a lot of postings in the chat. If anybody wants to speak up or post your questions in the Google Doc, again, remember the chat goes away. We'll try to transcribe it, but if you can put it in the Google Doc, that would be great.
And John Rice has his hand up, Grace.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Grace, something I'm having trouble adjusting my mental models to is the idea that AI always means big data, machine, go out and search through the garbage pile and find the good stuff is what it's boiled down to. And since AI is a big correlation machine, the garbage is not helpful. Now we got this grand challenge, and you want to create a data set for the grand challenge. That's not a massive big data set. If I understand right, what you're suggesting is we need to build some small, really good, creditable for its use data sets in order to even begin to develop a model. Now, if we can get a pure data set and build the model from the pure data set, we have several things. We may have a very useful model that can be put on the field, out running, doing good health very soon, and then expand from there. But the other thing we do is we learn what the good data would look like. Now, if 15 different people who all need the same data, each build their own data set, they're going to require things that are convenient to the way they've always worked. I create the standard so that it'll run in my software. Well, that's only going to work for a little while before we figure out we all might need to have to change our software a little bit so that we can start with a common standard for particular types of data. Those standards would apply at the source, at the point of collection. Those may not address every individual's specific needs, but those standards would incorporate what I need to be able to trace the data back to get the detail from my unique application. Is that concept like even close to what you're really trying to accomplish in the long run?
I think so. If I understand you correctly. And actually, this reminds me of something Mohammed actually told me a while ago, is that if you can actually have pristine data that's collected, you could use that to train other dirtier data sets, right?
I can actually just build on that real quick. I think really the comment is on point. The ambition here is not, okay, let's just gratuitously go out and collect data, right? And that's not the point. It's how do we come up with a principled approach to make an investment in collecting high quality, well thought through data assets that are going to be extensible and useful well beyond the lifetime of their collection, well beyond the lifetime, not only to you, but to others. That level of thought about, hey, how do I collect a data set so that it's not just useful for the one paper that my grad student needs to do in the next 6 months, but so that this is going to pay dividends back to my lab and to the broader research community who is interested in this kind of scientific inquiry for the next N years. How do we create a data set like that? Let's put some of our brain into that kind of design and thinking about the standards that need to govern it, how it ought to be shared, what are the fields that need to be collected. And I think having a theoretical understanding of the systems is absolutely essential for that. There's no more qualified set of people.
My very simple one-liner suggestion would be to spend 95% of your time talking about metadata and only 5% of the time talking about the actual data, because those are the things that are going to screw you up every step of the way. Is how do we actually collect and store and standardize and create the kinds of complex schemas that are needed for the metadata, and then the data will kind of work itself out.
And Catherine has her hand up.
Thanks, Joshua. Thanks, Mohammed.
And actually, this is the perfect time for me to ask the following question. So tying together everything that John and Mohammed and Joshua have said so far, and of course now the Marines are going to fly over the house and drown me out, but it happens. So I'll just ask the question, is the development of metadata standards constrained metadata standards to get past the problem that Mohammed has talked about? Because I mostly do defense simulation, but 1 second.
It's okay, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, they get really loud when they go right over. So, is, from personal experience, I can say I've struggled with catalogs of data and metadata where there was, a lot of the fields are free text, just like what Mohammed's talking about. And searching those is just really challenging. So the question is the development of standards potentially through recognized standards development organizations for metadata to make it possible to find data sets? Oh, you're nodding, I like that. Is that potentially in scope for Bridge2AI?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And again, remember, Bridge2AI will be a consortium effort. And this kind of discussion we're having today will be what we will continuously have throughout the program, because we will have to struggle through this for probably every data type, every grand challenge, that we talk about. And that's why I talk about generalizability between grand challenges. If you applied for one grand challenge, you might be put on a different grand challenge because of your expertise in ethics, for example. But you should be able to generalize across, because we want this data set that could go beyond your own problem.
And Rajanakanth, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Hi. So one question I had was, to what extent is a focus on the analysis methods that are expected to be employed downstream to this data? And the reason I raise that is, this Pankaj can resonate with this in his PI meetings. Often it's always a case that, oh, we have data, but no, not really what we need. And that becomes a major issue. And I point out that the standards and the metadata and these things, people have gone around the block a few times, right? With the big data that came around for the last few decades. And every single time, that has not guarded us against the kind of the poor experimental designs and the built-in biases in the way the data is collected, curated, and made available. The metadata standards and accessible, fair standards, if you will, the current ones, they're not sufficient. The gene expression omnibus is full of large data sets, massive numbers, and one might argue how correct they are in terms of the biases they have built in various experimental designs. Yeah. So how do we deal with that so that we're not just again at the same point 5 years from now and said we have fantastic amount of data, much of it is so biased and so big data in such a poor directions that they haven't thought through what we would do today back then. Yeah.
I mean, that's why we have this program, Raj, and the program was recommended by the community because of exactly what you just said. And bias is where the ethics part comes in. So if you looked at the original ACD recommendations to the NIH, the 3 pillars are people, ethics, and data. So ethics needs to be intertwined, and ethics and bias are on the same page.
So I just want to point out that the World Health Organization just a couple of days ago, 3 days ago actually, released their guidelines and principles of AI and healthcare and health, I suppose. So that's it will be useful to sort of look through that, and possibly coming from the more credible practice of modeling world, I might put in a pitch for that saying there are variants of it that are probably relevant to incorporate of credible practice of even data collection, if you will, that's right, worth thinking about in combination with the ethical principles, maybe in alignment with what WHO is saying.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think all this input is super helpful, and I hope you all get involved in the consortium activity to keep helping us think through these issues. Herbert, you want to?
Oh, yeah, I just mentioned I added a new section to the Google Docs comments from participants. So if anybody's got any things they'd like to preserve for posterity, they can add it there, okay?
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Great.
I wanted to actually add a quick comment here, if I may, Grace.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Yeah, there was somebody who's, sorry, I saw it briefly popped up in the chat. Somebody had asked about validation data, right? The collection of validation data. And I thought that was actually a really interesting point, because previously, at least in the community that I've been a part of, we have some annual recurring challenges. These are kind of community challenges, right? Where we get together and there's a novel data set that's created. The community all works against a shared training data set, if you will, in quotes, and then tests on a held out validation set that nobody can actually see other than the gatekeeper of that data. And there is an ethical angle as well as a, kind of an important scientific angle to why you should do that. Having that truly held out validation set means that when you go to test this, you're really fairly comparing all of the methodologies that were developed, because people can't just get a lucky slice of the training and validation set. They can't torture sort of the data to get the result that they want on that held out validation set. So you're sort of baking into data collection paradigm by setting aside a validation set that you won't release to the public, but that may be held out, like permanently, so to speak, or semi-permanently. A real way to do validation and comparison across investigators as well. So I just wanted to highlight, I thought that point about validation data was really phenomenal.
Thanks, Mohammed. If you want to add to the Google Doc chat, that would be great.
Sure.
Catherine, I think you posted that comment. Did you want to make a final comment?
I did, thank you, and that was my comment. And there's a great deal of opportunity to include in the metadata, not just validation, which is a critical thing, but any metadata about these other issues. I think one of the earlier commenters discussed the issues with all of these data sets and the fact that we don't know how good they are. And so, maybe one approach is to identify the key challenges to reusing these big data sets and then say, okay, well, if those are challenges, then we need to capture in the metadata information that tells us, that answers our questions about those big data sets. So we're not just sort of, wandering blindly in the wilderness, wondering, how this data was collected and, what its use might be.
Right. I mean, I was just listening to one of my grantees talk about a specific project, and everything needs to be within the context of those applications. And so by having a well-defined data set, you also define the context within the metadata as well. All right, well, we are at the top of the 4 o'clock hour, and we are going to switch over to the next section, which will be led by the Viral Pandemic Working Group, which is focused on the digital twin idea, which is actually one of the grand challenge examples that we put in the funding opportunity as an illustration of a big challenge that people can use to motivate the collection of these complex data sets that are ethically sourced from diverse perspectives. And so I'll turn it over to James and Reinhard to run this portion of the discussion.
Okay, well, I hope many of you will stay on. I think there's a natural bridge here going between the concept of AI as something that can enhance mechanistic modeling in all sorts of interesting ways, to the fact that mechanistic modeling can also do very important things for AI, in particular in the context of providing synthetic data sets. And the idea that you can do counterfactuals, many areas. And of course, ultimately trying to put these two things together to come out with powerful solutions that are beyond the capability of either one on its own. And the paper that Grace wrote with Mark Alber, I think, is a great, lays out a lot of those issues very beautifully. And so I think Grace's suggestion was that the theme here for the remainder of the discussion might be in the context of perhaps thinking about medical digital twins. We had in sort of in parenthesis the idea of medical digital twins in the context of immune response, but also elsewhere, and the role of multiscale modeling, because many people think of digital twins primarily as data-based without mechanistic components, and certainly some are. And that's something I hope we can discuss. And then we'll have Reid Shabman from NIAID talk a little bit, and then we'll talk also about possibility of organizing an IMAG MSM meeting around this topic. For people who are not regulars in this group, as Grace mentioned, we were set up in the summer of 2020. We had our inaugural meeting on October 22nd in 2020. All of these discussions are archived, and we have a variety of subgroups developing white papers. Several of the people on the call have been speaking. We've had diverse speakers on everything from data standards to epidemiology to in-host modeling. We've tried to reach beyond the academic community to include people from the agencies, from industry, science writers, and people who try to organize international consortia. And so I just wanted to show the diversity that we've tried to have in this community. The working group is just a talking shop to try to create connections and opportunities. And we have a number of subgroups that are working on white papers on various areas, and your contributions and input on all of these would be much appreciated. As the discussion has gone on in this working group, there has been more and more, I wouldn't say a consensus, but many people have discussed digital twins as a concept. In particular, the idea of digital twins related to infection and immune response. And the focus on immune response comes about because the immune system is a nexus of failure or opportunity for cancer, for autoimmune diseases, for arthritis, for diabetes, as well as infectious diseases. And so the more we thought about these problems, the more it seemed that the immune system particularly was interesting as a target for digital twins, but this discussion can be much more general than that. Reinhard, Jim Sluke and I did a little editorial in Science a few weeks ago talking about digital twins in this immunological viral context, which people are welcome to look at. And we've got some online materials. Obviously, there's this fantasy that you have wonderful sets of data leading to diagnosis, prognosis, therapy optimization, salutogenesis, which is a wonderful term I hadn't heard before Bridge2AI last week or 2 weeks ago, but a wonderful term. And there are one or two things for people, for the one person in the room who hasn't thought about digital twins. I think the key thing, one of the key things to remember when you're thinking about digital twins is that every digital twin consists of at least two components. A concept of a validated template simulation, which could be data-based or could be mechanistic or a combination, which describes the typical time evolution of something that you're interested in. It could be, for example, the typical metabolism of acetaminophen in a typical human liver. And then you have what's called an instance, which is a description of a specific individual, a particular 60-year-old Black female with diabetes who has a history of some condition and who has a fever. And so the key idea of a digital twin is this idea of a template that is validated, which can be validated because it describes many instances, and an individual instance which cannot necessarily be independently validated. Outputs are time series with a range of likelihoods. And of course, if you're going to develop these, you have to understand what you want to predict and why you want to predict it. And you have to accept that there'll be divergence between prediction and observation. And that means that ultimately, digital twins are only useful if you can measure things that validate them. And that's not so easy in the context of medicine. We had a wonderful talk by Rusty Irving, who was one of the developers and pioneers at General Electric of digital twin concept. And I strongly recommend listening to his talk. We sent it around earlier. And one of the points that he made, I think, is very important, is that you need to start with very well-defined and validated models of limited things when you're going to build digital twins. And another thing to think about is that there's a rather significant difference between real-time applications, which would be an example of controlling an artificial pancreas or a pacemaker, from offline applications like the design of surgical interventions. And so those were a couple of the things I thought we might want to think about. Rusty talked a little bit about some of the difficulties of building digital twins. In engineering, you have designs and you can do forward engineering. In biology, we have to reverse engineer because there's a lot of science we don't know. It's much harder to make experimental measurements. We can't put extensive sensors into at least healthy individuals. And so we can't get the time series validation data that you can for an airplane engine. And I think it's worth reviewing some of these issues from Rusty's talk. I wanted to put up as a starter here some of the opportunities, questions, and challenges that I saw. And these are just to get the discussion going. I mentioned already this idea of using mechanistic models to generate factual data for AI. Of course, we have this vision of delivering better healthcare with digital twins. The questions, starting out with what questions should we be asking and what needs to be answered? What are the metrics we'll use? What data are available now that we could use? How do we present those data to decision makers, individuals, clinicians, policymakers? How do we provide agency to patients? And then the challenges, starting with the fact that there's the scientific uncertainty, the fact that we have difficulty making real-time measurements, the fact that there are going to be rare cases that are important, that are hard to sweep in experimental data sets. And so I hope that with that, we could start an open discussion of some of these issues and let that go on for about half an hour, and then turn things over to Reid Shabman to talk about NIAID interests, and then conclude our hour with a discussion of possible meeting. Does that seem okay to you, Grace? So with that, I'll turn it over to the rest of you for comments and discussion.
Thanks, James. And I think it would be really useful for people to just think about, you know, what are the next steps that the MSM could do to make this happen? Do we need a meeting in the fall to really brainstorm some details? Gary, I see your hands up.
Yeah, so thanks. Maybe you could, James, can you go back to the slide that points out the distinctions between traditional machine digital twins and the human digital twins? Because I think this is really important, because the the stuff that's happening on the left side under people, right, is exactly the sorts of kind of epistemic challenges that we need to overcome in getting people to establish trustworthiness in the models that we actually have, right? The things that are on the right side, those are grounded, closed systems. They have some sort of, you know, formal constraints associated with them, and we're dealing with a great deal of more uncertainty. We're dealing with, you know, incompleteness with respect to representation, et cetera. So I think one of the key points that we should talk about with respect to the use of multiscale modeling is the ability to potentially address some of those specific issues related to people-oriented digital twins, right? So it's not just a data structure. It is not a ground truth simulation. There's going to be, you know, incompleteness and uncertainty associated with those particular objects and such. So I think, you know, all of us have run into challenges with respect to the acceptance of the validity of the approach of the types of models that we make, that there's a great deal of emphasis on a high degree of fidelity to a particular real world system. And I think that, you know, identifying the appropriate output metrics that can have translational utility would be, you know, a way that we would need to make the case for using multi-scale models as a means of achieving these types of digital twins. Because let me just be perfectly frank, I think a lot of the way that the other biomedical people talk about digital twins, they think of them as data structures. And they're not just data structures, they are dynamic objects that can generate future trajectories and lots of multiple possibilities going into the future. So I think that, you know, emphasizing what the differences are between how a digital twin for a biological system is, as opposed to how it is been used in the more technical domains, I think is important moving forward. So
I think before we go on to another question, and I see a couple of hands raised, I think I had this slide here as a talking point, which is I think it would be very helpful to have people who have ideas about what you could think of as successful medical digital twins. And again, we had a wonderful talk from HeartFlow talking about their use in diagnostics. And that really is a deployed, FDA-approved model of an individual patient's cardiovascular system that's used in making clinical decisions. It's offline, but it's a very powerful concept of personalization. I've got pancreas misspelled on the slide, I apologize. But these simpler concepts of dynamics are also very important and worth considering. And they're going to be different examples. I think if people have ideas about good examples of best practice or success cases, that could be very helpful so that we don't miss these opportunities. So let's go on. Maybe can I go to Catherine next, and then to Rajanakant, please.
Thank you. So I want to comment on, you know, how digital twinning is done in the mechanical world, and ask if there are some parallels here that might apply. And so digital twinning has as its basis model-based systems engineering. And model-based systems engineering is traditionally based on a standard, which is SysML. And there are multiple tools in which you can build SysML models, you know, things like Cameo and Enterprise Architect are, you know, sort of the two big players in that field. And so the simulation starts much earlier with the construction of those models those SysML models in some tool. And so so now I'm going to demonstrate that I'm really, kind of in the mechanical / defense space. But is it possible to either use tools and techniques like that, or to develop healthcare specific tools and techniques for representing human digital twins? I'm struggling with the idea of maybe of representing a human as a system in SysML, but maybe it's not an entirely crazy idea. But that's just a thought. Over.
So Catherine, I think what you just mentioned is really where my director Bruce Tromberg was getting at in his little director's blog and also in his video, in that, with humans, we can't have optimal physics-based models to explain everything in the biological system. And so we would need to rely on machine learning and other methods to sort of fill in the gaps. But the overarching idea of having a twin of us or of us with machines is something that motivates the broad collection of data that could be stitched together in real time. So again, the digital twin idea with respect to Bridge2AI is the broad, complex, multimodal, multiscale, synchronous, real-time data from sensorized instruments. Collecting the data in a very standardized way is what's motivating the Bridge2AI Grand Challenge.
It may be worth saying that Rusty, in his talk, envisioned that we would all have implantable biosensors that would be doing real-time blood chemistry and all of us and telemetrically reporting it. To create a digital twin of the resolution that you have for an airplane engine might require something like that. And of course, that has all sorts of interesting questions about the ethics of doing these things in healthy individuals. Maybe it's easier to start with people in an ICU. And so I think the data sets are something worth at least putting up on the screen. Rajanikant, please turn to you.
Hey, Jim, can you put up that slide back again that you had, the people versus machine comparison that we all seem to like? So I want to see if, maybe part of it is contrarian point of view here, but as a process control systems person originally, I want to point out that if one would make this kind of a slide in 1950, there wouldn't have been difference between people and machine. We don't have blueprints for the machines. They make stuff that we don't fully understand. There are many confounding factors. Distillation column is a complex beast. We had no freaking idea how it even worked. Maybe we do better now. Very limited sensor data. There were no computers to crunch it. Environmental exposure. Who knows how it affects when it rains? The whole column goes nuts. And they're highly unpredictable. And yet we didn't have them blowing up all around us all the time, right? We found a way to manage them and control them and still produce a product that we all liked when we walked into the bar. So my point basically being that maybe there is a certain perspective that drove the idea of control, data, dynamic systems that drove the methodologies, development, and practical operations back in that time. Maybe in the curse of knowledge, curse of data, we have lost that art, so to speak. And maybe there is some value in returning to some of those essential principles of which comes back to the purpose, right? What is it that we are trying to do with this data? And maybe you don't need to collect blood chemistry with an implanted thing. What we are trying to do is, should we let you in or not in the office today based on your temperature from a thermal sensor? Yeah. So it's sort of, it's all connected to the purpose, and the resolution of a digital twin, I would say that is really cannot be disconnected from the purpose. Otherwise it just becomes a replacement engine. That's not what it's meant to be, right? It's meant to be. So from a control systems, the purpose, the reference, trajectory, that's completely connected with what the system and the controller is. You can't separate them and do something meaningful. So there must be a way to incorporate that concept whenever we talk about a digital twin, a purpose-driven digital twin, perhaps something around that nature, yeah?
This is John, and I don't know how much time we got to invest calling it digital twin and explaining why it's not what a digital twin was intended and designed to be. The industrial digital twin serves a purpose for a system. It works on the principle that the model came first, and there are thousands of copies of the model that all work exactly the way the model designed it to work. And by the time the thing is built and delivered, it is tuned to behave.
John, I think you muted yourself in between.
I'm sorry. By the time the thing is built, it's tuned to match the model. And then there's thousands of them. And for the entire life of that product, the purpose of having the data that you can collect from the product, because you can put whatever sensors on it you want, is to make sure that it stays operating and looking exactly like it did the day it was built. Why are we even trying to think about that concept in a human where we have no model to start? Every baby that's born, you know, if there's any time that two humans might even be close, it's when they're born, and for the entire rest of their lives, every human continues to become more different. Engineering? No. The purpose is that there is no difference. If there is, you shut the system down and fix it. That's not what we're doing. Could we have a contest to just come up with a new label for what we're trying to do with the idea that digital twin has, and give it a new name, and stop calling it digital twin and writing books about why it's not what digital twins are? I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Can we, John, can we let we've got some other hands up. Is it you, Dong?
Yes. Hi, Grace. Thank you for sending the invitation. Really enjoyed the talk. I'm from Mayo Rochester. Nice to see a lot of old friends here. I am approaching the digital twin from the hospital operation standpoint for the clinician behavior, operation research, that kind of thing. I'm just wondering, because those are not the traditional biomedical engineering field, not traditional biosphere, but actually those are very important connection between the population and to the biology. So also we have some other clinicians here. I'm just curious, you know, do we as a whole community really see that's a low-hanging fruit, because those are mechanistic, they have sensors, they have RAID available there, HR, all log files there. We don't need to recreate the, you know, different systems. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to really work together. But I think the challenge is really articulate the challenge, because there are so many unknowns. I think that's really trouble a lot of clinicians, you know, because we don't know those things exist. We don't know those contributing variations. We don't know those contribute. And I think that the COVID is a great example. So I mean, that's really a lot of challenge is really resource allocation, you know, distribution issues, not just biology issues. So welcome any thoughts, comments. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Eric. I know where I am on my screen. I'm on the far left, but of course I don't. So I know UA well, and I know John well. Was it Raj that had the comment? And I'm mispronouncing your name, so I apologize. I think we're missing this piece. I think like the digital twin, as the general public wants it to be, has got all that confounding data and is really this moment in time is probably very difficult to make. That said, if we want to come up with a digital branching narrative based on known human physiology to determine if somebody is a high risk for having a particular viral load, or particular illness, that's very doable, right? So particularly in the context of what we're, you know, the pandemic at this point, we knew that cough, fever, and length of exposure could pretty predictably be modeled to come up with a percentile risk of whether you were exposed and what the likelihood of transmission was and what the likelihood of transmission of viral load. So we could do that. But then I think the challenge is we could do that very predictably. And I think COVID provided us with the opportunity. I mean, literally that the minutes of exposure with or without a mask was predictable. But then when we start to get to the more difficult modeling, like who was going to have long haul symptoms, who was going to lose their taste, who was going to develop cardiac disease, those things were incredibly unpredictable because you had to map it back to that. And I mean, I think what we're going to find is you have to map that back to the individual DNA and then find a cohort of people with DNA like that and then run the model, which is much harder to do in real time in a meaningful way. It'll be a great paper 22 months from now, but not particularly helpful in the moment. And so what I think we should be at is, yes, people that want to do that long-term research, it should be done. But how do we take the notion of digital twin, I don't really like the name for human physiology, and make that translational. And I just, this anecdote real quickly that I shared with John the other day is I had one of the first human patient HPS simulators, human patient simulators that was done by Medi at the time. That the code was written by Sem, our colleague Sem. And I remember I was doing this study in my lab and I wanted to validate it. So I said, oh, you have this interesting coefficient called cardiac output, but it's not really cardiac output. What is it? And what it turned out to be was that once the model spirals to here, there's no way to recover the patient and the patient dies. And I said, based on what? And the answer was based on nothing. It was an artifact of programming that just made the patient so sick that nobody could ever recover the patient. So the problem with that scenario is that particular software was touted as the world's best, physiologic model, but it had this like antimatter in it from like Star Trek, right? Like it worked because they had this code in there that like you had to have the antimatter in there to work, but the antimatter essentially meant that the whole model wasn't valid. And so I think that's what we have to be very careful with. How many variables are we trying to account for before the whole model is not valid?
So we're going to have to move on in a minute. I would suggest that we've heard a lot of statements about what digital twins aren't and about what doesn't work. And I was hoping to have a little bit more positive examples of what has worked in the area of medical digital twins, because there are certainly, especially in cardiovascular, quite a few. And also about what we saw as opportunities. And those opportunities could be of systems to model like immune system in general, or it could be a very narrow statement about what the value added is, to use Rusty Irving's definition. What is it we would gain by being able to build a very well validated predictive model of a specific system or of a specific disease or of a specific question? And then ask the question, what data sets would you need to do it? And how would you deliver it? And so I think I'd like to encourage us to try to think forward and be positive about this and accept the fact that there'll be differences in terminology and that there have been failures in the past, because I do think there are tremendous opportunities if we are positive. And we can certainly learn from failures, but I think that to dwell too much on the failures perhaps blinds us to the fact that there's a tremendous expertise in the room that could be used to identify opportunities. And so, again, we're not engineered systems. We don't have full data, but that doesn't mean that we can't make useful predictions. And those predictions could be online, they could be offline, they could be diagnosis, they could be prognosis, they could in principle be control of systems. And I think there are many, many opportunities here that we could explore, and especially thinking about how to put the mechanistic modeling together with the artificial intelligence. And so I really I mean, we're going to run out of time now. Maybe we can come back after Reed's talk. But I'd like everyone to think about the question, perhaps, what are the successes, if any, that you've seen in these areas? What do you see as the best targets of opportunity? What would the payoffs be? What would you need in terms of data to deliver those things? What data are available now? What would we do with data we have now? What data do we lack? Are those data even collectible now? Can we define the questions? I think if we could clarify those issues, and I think Bridge2AI is trying to do that, we could go very far and not butt heads, but instead have a unified approach to move forward. I don't know, Grace, if that seems reasonable to you, but I'm hoping that, I mean, I understand the history and that we're stuck with the history, but I'm trying to avoid spending too much time.
I was writing into the chat to completely agree with you. I'm glad you're turning it back to a more positive mode, since we have, you know, an entire army of discussants here who can really contribute positively. And we don't really want to get tripped up with an idea or a term. We don't have to call it digital twins, but the whole idea is that people seem to understand that concept, and we could evolve from that concept. I mean, I posted in the chat where we started talking about it in the consortium in 2019. But if you go back to the original AI report from 2018 that started this whole Bridge2AI journey, you know, it depends on where you want to start. One of the keynote speakers during that report talked about, well, what is it that we want to address in terms of healthcare? Is our goal basically to have a step function in life where we're completely healthy and then we die, and so we don't have that long degradation of health? And how do we achieve that? And do we achieve that with a predictive model that helps us keep up on this, you know, the step function, so that we are at optimal health without having to have degraded function? And so, I mean, you know, that's another way to think. Is that our big picture goal in terms of healthcare research? I see Vasilis has his hands up, so let's Vasilis talk, and then we should have our NIAID folks talk.
Thank you. I'll try not to take too much time, because I want to be considered. First of all, thank you, Grace, for organizing this. I found this discussion very, very stimulating and worthy. A lot of good ideas. I would like to add my voice to the optimistic comments that were made at the close of this session. I am an optimist. I believe we have done reasonably well. We can do a lot better, of course, obviously. And the problem we're facing is extremely complex and tough and formidable. We all recognize that. But the difficulty of the problem should not deter us from trying harder and harder and extending. So I agree with the spirit of what was said a few minutes earlier. And I would like to share also in imparting some thoughts from my own experience, which I think may be useful for this audience. I would like to really offer a strong, I would say, exhortation to our group, which is really a pioneering group, the way I see it, very open-minded and at the forefront of this effort, to consider that we must talk more and more about the absolute need to look at this problem in a multivariate context, something you all recognize, but is not really discussed enough. The fact that these living systems can only be understood, even impartially, but reasonably understood in a multivariate context, and those variables are highly interconnected as well, which is to say, as a practical implication to the previous discussion, that we must be collecting data on multiple variables that are pertinent to the particular question we try to answer. So the multivariate aspect is critical. The other equally critical aspect is the aspect of dynamics. I find it extremely disturbing, because I'm a person who deals with dynamic modeling a lot in my life. I find it extremely disturbing when I realize the total, essentially, I could say, ignorance that exists among our medical colleagues on the importance and the fundamental importance of dynamics in physiological systems. So I think the idea that the living systems we care for are truly dynamic and have to be understood as dynamic systems is absolutely essential as far as I'm concerned. So my exhortation is to really talk more about that and kind of try to impress on people the idea that the data must be collected also in a dynamic fashion. In other words, in time series, not just static variables, as it is often the case. And I close by saying, because we don't have much time, and I apologize if I'm taking a little longer, that we must all recognize on the outset of whenever we talk about these things that the system is stochastic. So we don't really have to worry about having to explain or apologize about the stochasticity of the system. We cannot predict with precise accuracy. We of course know this, and there's no problem at all in admitting this openly, directly, and just say, well, we're gonna do, our best deterministic model and add to it any stochastic element we can actually quantify. The system is stochastic. So 3 words: stochastic, dynamic, multivariate is what I would like to leave you with. Thank you. It was great to see you all. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you. I want to give Reed, since he's been waiting patiently, his opportunity to speak, and then we can come back to the discussion about ways forward, in particular, whether we should be thinking about IMAG MSM fall meeting on this topic. So Reed, I'll come over to you now.
Great, thanks. No worries. It's been a great conversation, and I will be quick. So maybe James, if you could advance, I think my slides are in your deck. So if we could just go to right there. Yep, and I'll just say next slide. So I think as I was sitting here, I was thinking that my quick comments might be a nice bridge between what we were talking about with digital twins and also the meeting. And I think you'll see very quickly that we think in the concept of digital twins, but we don't use that term necessarily. But I think that maybe this will provide a little insight. And so I was asked to kind of just give a quick overview of NIAID and the NIAID perspective on all of this. And I was speaking with my director, Liliana Brown, and she said, well, we should give a 1-second slide on the organization structure because it's very confusing. So just so you understand, and this is to provide context so that it's bigger than my comments. And so if you want to reach out to other folks, then I absolutely encourage you to do so. So this is our structure. I don't have time to go into it, but I want to point out 3 key things. There are 3 extramural divisions that fund academic grants and contracts. That's the Division of AIDS, the Division of Allergy, Immunology, and Transplantation. My colleague Tim Condre Lewis is on the call as well from GATE. And then there's the Division of Microbiology, Infectious Diseases, where I sit. Oh, oops, I was on the next slide. I tried to advance on my end. Thanks. It'll go. Yeah, so on the next slide here is just looking at where I sit. So within DMID, Division of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases, there's a number of branches which are pathogen focused. And then there's a number of offices where we sit in the office. I sit in the Office of Advanced Genomics and Advanced Technologies, where we're really pathogen agnostic, but we're really interested in technology and computational approaches to understanding infectious diseases across pathogens. So that hopefully that gives you a little perspective of the next slides and where we're coming from. So on the next slide, that I wanted to give sort of this NIAID, DMID, OGAT, which is where I said viewpoints. And so I'll put all this into the Google Doc, or anywhere you see a hyperlink. But basically, our OGAT perspective in terms of modeling is that disease dynamics are influenced at many levels, including exposure to infection, biological, zoonotic, environmental determinants, individual and population health status, socioeconomic risk factors, and policies that influence behavior. So how do you bridge epi and molecular data into a model, which I think is, in my opinion, is a gap? Maybe we can talk about that. Our office joined this viral pandemic working group to understand the modeling landscape that incorporates data from these multiple scales and dimensions and into infectious disease modeling. And so our involvement in this working group has really helped us to understand how to help promote interactions between these computational biologists, statisticians, epi, medical personnel, and laboratory scientists. Really want to develop methods for the design and analysis of experimental studies and models. It supports our office interests. Here are 2 examples I picked. This is not comprehensive, but I don't have a lot of room on the slide. So perhaps toggling between individual and sort of pie in the sky, toggling between individual and population level risks in infectious disease forecasting based on parameters across multiple levels and scales. Another example might be models that incorporate variables that go across a number of areas, such as the pathogen adherence of proteins, i.e. viral spike ACE2 to the host cell receptor ACE2, and then integrate that with genomic variability in both the host and the pathogen, as well as individual health status and personal risk factors, local pathogen spread in the community, and personal mobility data. So really putting all of it together, it would be really cool. So on the next slide, and I would just say, as I go to the next slide, that by joining these talks that you had every Thursday, it's really, you have provided specific examples to those things, and that's been very helpful. So I just want to make my last slide here, just a couple of comments on the fall meeting and some useful links. To me, a desire, I've been very interested. I've spoken with Grace and others that lead this group about being involved. Desired outcomes from a meeting, if one was to have one, would be to understand how current multi-scale landscapes, such as, we have animal data, we have in vitro data, we have clinical data, we have wastewater data, right? Environmental data. How can those be used to address viral pandemics, coming from the viral pandemic working group perspective? And then where are the gaps in those areas? So what are the gaps and challenges to integrate disparate data types? And then finally, obviously, to provide networking opportunities in the community to, it goes beyond that meeting. It's sort of a midpoint in that bigger picture. We would like to understand how digital twins and other models could support individual risk predictions and additional multi-scale models that influence an epidemic or pandemic. So perhaps focusing on digital twins, but then as well as other predictive models. Some useful links. I gave a presentation in December, a little bit of our perspective in more detail. That's on the IMAG, it's on the website, slides and video, I'll link them. I want to point out NIAID funding opportunities. It's a great resource to look for some of these things. So when you click on that link, you'll be able to go in and see all of them. One I want to highlight is like heterogeneous responses to influenza infection. It's an R01, it's a computational approach to say, why do some people get sick, why don't they, for influenza? It's kind of, COVID might have put influenza on the endangered species list for a few months, but I'm sure it'll come back once we all go out and mingle. I think the DMID approved council concepts is another place I wanted to point your attention to. These include potential ideas that may turn into funding announcements. So two examples that I think are on the line of computational modeling digital twins is the systems biology infectious diseases. That concept was just posted. I'm a program officer there, and it's really to integrate omics data into predictive models of human disease is sort of the concept that's been presented. So I think it's very relevant. We don't call it digital twin, but I think it has a lot of parallel themes. And then obviously this one has received some press. So I just highlighted antiviral drug discovery centers for pathogens of pandemic concern, relevant to your working groups. It's a concept, hasn't turned into a FOA, but there probably would be computational and modeling aspects there. And I think as you go to this NIAID funding opportunities page or talk, what you'll see is that there are elements within these opportunities that integrate modeling and approaches to these grants. It doesn't hurt to take 10 minutes and skim it every couple of weeks. So I hope that was clear. I'm happy to discuss some more specific examples of success in predictive models and where we need to go, but I'll like to turn it back over to the group for the last 15 minutes.
Are there any questions for Reid while we have him here?
So how can I combine, if I have a multi-scale model that deals with something, is doing something directly with the infectious process, but I'm also now picking up on what the rest of NIH says about data sets. So I want to work that model, but I want to incorporate the data set building. This is not inexpensive in terms of time and funding resources. So if I write a proposal to you guys to address one of your questions, is there the mechanism to merge funding some way to make that funding sufficient that I can come work on that for you, but have the resources I need to also build the data set. So it's not a grand challenge thing anymore. It's back to a single model, but I do want to use the data set concept.
Sorry, John, could we let's let Reed answer and then move on to some other people's questions because there are a bunch of other ones here.
Okay, hopefully I'll be real quick on that. It's a great question. I think the fastest way I can answer that is there are investigator initiated grants, which are reviewed at like CSR. And so if you have an idea, you could come in, I'd be happy to speak with you about if that fits the NIAID mission. There's also set aside funds for doing things that NIAID sees as a priority. I think to your point, these things are not cheap. And so understanding those gaps in a meeting would be useful. I think I put a couple, in terms of data science, there are a number of data science initiatives that have been posted. I think I put a couple of those on the IMAG site that look at, there's maybe different components of what you just, to unpack your question. There are notices for improving our data science approaches for specific platforms. I think we shared those a couple months ago, if I'm understanding correctly, that might be one element. It might be a combination of situations. It might not be it might not be at the scale of Bridge2AI or these other programs, but I think if I understand what you're trying to do, there might be ways to identify where the most appropriate places are to play.
I think that's a great point you're bringing up, because the Bridge2AI really hopes that it will seep into the rest of the community. And I'm getting already questions about people who are collecting existing data, if they can use the Bridge2AI culture to help them with their current clinical trials or data sets. And so anyone's welcome to participate in the Bridge2AI conversations, even if they're not funded, but to learn the culture and the spirit of ethically sourced, diverse perspective generated data. So I think that's a great point. Reinhard, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Grace. So thanks, Reed, for that introduction and for the interest in the working group. I think what would be great is if you could give one of those 15-minute talks elaborating on the things you just mentioned. I want to also bring this back to the working group and second some things that James said earlier. One of the really important early foci of the working group is to essentially make an inventory of what are the models we have, what are the models we need in order to build a more comprehensive model of some part of the immune response. What are data sets that we have? What are data sets that we need? And identify some of the technical and mathematical and social challenges of building large-scale integrated models that could be the basis of a digital twin. So I think a lot of the contributions that we need were brought up in discussion, and anybody I think who has an interest in this and has expertise, I think is very welcome to help us make this inventory and then point forward. And I think this sort of activity is a natural connection and a natural lead-in to this Bridge2AI initiative, because it will bring up places where obviously data are needed that are required for the pieces in such an immune response model that cannot be filled by mechanistic models.
And I want to emphasize, I put it in the chat, that I think that there was a very good point that we shouldn't limit our concept of digital twins generically to being inside a human, that modeling healthcare delivery systems, modeling how viruses are transmitted in the environment, these are all legitimate digital twin questions. And some of them may actually be easier to answer than in-host responses because they may be easier to instrument. And so when I was saying that I think we need lists of suggestions for success stories, and then a list of what I think Grace would call grand challenges in the area of digital twins, but also being very clear, following Rusty's dictum of, for a digital twin, you should say what you're going to predict, why you're going to predict it, and what the value added of the prediction is. And then GE, I guess they were very ruthless in saying the payoff will be X dollars and the cost will be Y dollars, and we pick the ones that have the best ratio. We maybe aren't quite like that, but I think it's worth asking those questions in a serious way, maybe not quite in the dollars context. But for example, what data sets are available to calibrate a digital twin? It may be very desirable, but impossible to collect data. I think these are important questions. Reinhard, we're going to run out a little bit of time. So I wanted to give, are there other questions specifically for Reed, or shall we open it up more to the general discussion of whether a fall meeting on this general idea of whether we call it digital twins or not? I don't want to refight. On the concept of digital twins, medical digital twins, is it worth having a meeting to discuss these and perhaps to try to identify some of these target areas which could be the most promising and target needs?
Yeah, and James, I never figured out how to do a survey in Zoom, but if anyone wants to throw out a survey in terms of voting or something, we'd like to really get feedback on whether or not you want to have a fall meeting to discuss these topics, and then what topics we want to discuss. What do we want to get out of the fall meeting? And I think on the screen, you already have some ideas of potential outcomes, and maybe we'll start there.
Well, it'll take a little time to set up a survey, but there's an easy way to do it. You have your response button. If people would like to see a fall meeting on the general topic of, if people think that's a good idea, give it a thumbs up. If you think it's a bad idea, give it a thumbs down. And we can get a rough, it's not going to be a formal vote, but I think we could do it that way. If people have trouble finding those buttons, let me know. Or I could have just said explicitly, I think anybody who's hung out till now probably thinks it's not a terrible idea. If people are trying to say no and they think it's a terrible idea, let me know and we can count their vote.
How about this? If people are interested in helping to plan the meeting, put your name in the Google Doc.
That's a harder one because now you're asking for work rather than an opinion.
Or at least join a second meeting after this one to actually brainstorm it. Then
I think that's an easier bet. So, yeah. I mean, does anybody think that if somebody thinks it's a terrible idea, let me put it a different way. Does anybody think that there would be a better use of the fall meeting instead of that? Does somebody have a counter proposal? Because of that maybe is a more positive way to say it.
Yes, and should it be a fall meeting or should it just be a series of discussions?
At this point, I would see the fall meeting potential being, we just heard a whole lot of things, many of which maybe deserve an hour of their own in brainstorming sessions, you know, of the things that were talked about today. Also keep in mind, this is a working group for virus pandemic that is a subset of, I guess there's still a multi-scale modeling consortium, Grace. Like, is the consortium still really there? Going to be? That's as a question that you could maybe answer. But there's a lot of other people that have a history of being part of the multi-scale modeling program and consortium and community that maybe need to hear and participate in these same discussions. So, you know, we had been asked about trying to propose an outline for the fall meeting, and the outreach and dissemination subgroup of this virus pandemic group were willing to work on that with Grace and the staff. So, you know, you can send me emails if you have ideas for roundtable discussions or brainstorm discussions or focus groups, you know, rather than the typical present your model data.
I guess to clarify.
Yeah, so I always open up the consortium meetings by saying that this consortium is of the people, by the people, for the people. So it's really up to you all if you want to have the meeting. We're NIH are facilitators to have you help us or help you run it. And so when the viral pandemic working group said that they're interested, I you know, I was very excited. So if you guys want to help organize it, and folks on the call want to help organize it, I think that's great.
I want to say something in response to a comment in the chat. I see this issue of medical digital twins, or to avoid the term, predictive models of individuals, whether those are systems like healthcare systems or individual like you and me, as very important. It goes way beyond just viral infection and immune response to viral infection. My opening it up to say immune system is probably too limited in some ways and too broad in others. If people would be willing to, each of you say, if you could build a single digital twin to answer a specific problem that you think would be path-breaking or important, and type it into that Google document, that would be a fantastic thing to have. If everyone in this room would type in one suggestion for what their perfect digital twin is. I want a perfect digital twin of the heart because I want to predict heart attacks. I want to predict aneurysms. I want to predict stroke. I want to predict this. And then we could begin to think about what data sets you need. What is it possible? Do we have that information? Of course, lots of people have done this already in their own fields, but not all of us in the room know these things. And so we may have the title viral pandemic multiscale model working group, but we're all modelers, and most of us come from fields that are not primarily devoted to multiscale modeling of viral pandemics. We're coming in from multiscale modeling, and my background is in developmental biology. So you have expertise that goes way beyond. We have Denise Kirshner in the room, of course, models tuberculosis in beautiful ways. We have Kristen Swanson, who models glioblastoma in beautiful ways. We're not trying to say that because we have the name viral pandemics on our title, that this meeting has to be about predictive models and digital twins for viral pandemics. It just happens to be a form.
Yeah, can I just jump in for a second? Because I was given the opportunity to present NIAID, I highlighted stuff that I was interested in, but I completely agree with that comment that it should be more beyond that. So, thanks.
So if I may add to that, one concern, Jim, Grace, and others is if there is no domain-specific, some kind of a focus, I worry if it becomes too superficial and not get into. I mean, we'll end up talking about how things are stochastic and unpredictable and this, that, and the other, and we'll all go home. But instead, if we make it a bit specific, we will have an opportunity to dig into, even if it is domain specific, some details, right? With the expectation that 3/4 of it is generally applicable, but we'll get something a bit more useful done. Otherwise, we'll keep, I mean, it's almost feels like this is an in-person meeting 10 years ago, right? I mean, so many things that we talked about were issues 10 years ago and the 10 years prior to that, and so on and so forth. So we don't want to keep saying the same thing. We should, that's my inclination.
Well, that was why I proposed immune system as a problem, because it crosses to cancer and these other institutes, but it's also critical to NIAID. But that may be too broad or too narrow. But maybe let's end. We're out of time. How many people think that a focus on predictive modeling of the immune system generically would be a reasonable topic for a meeting?
I think it's.
I don't see a groundswell of enthusiasm, but I don't see.
No, I think it's great.
Bunch of yeses through the chat.
You got a bunch of yeses in the chat. So yeah, I mean, if the yeses could put immune system down, I mean, the Google Doc really is, again, a kind of a survey. And again, Raj, I agree with you. Like, we don't want to talk about 20 different topics, but let's say if 20 people wanted to talk about the immune system, I mean, then we can move forward with some sort of planning. But if only one person wants to talk about, you know, another system, then we know that there's less interest there.
Yeah, I wouldn't second the thought that, you know, you don't want to necessarily recreate the wheel, because, you know, I'm part of the MIDAS network. So we've been talking about modeling pandemics for like past 15 years. So this sort of distinguishing from some of those things. And the other thing that I might suggest is not focusing on the word predictive modeling, because that's really one aspect of the benefits of modeling. And one of the things that we've been facing during the pandemic is too many people are viewing models as crystal balls. And whereas we want to kind of, I think, move away from that. And because I think we're missing a lot of the benefits of modeling if we really just focus on forecasting. It's only one benefit of modeling, and there's so many other things that we can do with it.
Well, I think that has to be the last word because we're out of time. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much to all of our agency and institute representatives who spent a great deal of their valuable time with us. Thank you all to our participants. I hope this was useful. Please keep filling in that Google Doc. That would be extremely helpful. Reinhardt and I are available. John Rice is available. And of course, the Institute people are the important ones here. Reinhardt and I are just facilitators here in this meeting. And I hope maybe we'll see some people who are not regulars in our next week's working group. As I say, our title may be a multi-scale modeling of viral pandemics, but in fact, if you look at our speakers, we've gone way beyond that. We've had MIDAS representatives, we've had epidemiologists, we've had people doing flow models. And so I think that these areas are so interconnected, trying to draw narrow boundaries between them is very difficult. On the other hand, the issue of focus is also important. You don't want to model predictive models of everything as a topic. And with that, I will call the meeting to a close and thank you all for your staying with us for 2 hours.